In the frozen depths of winter, when snow blankets the world in silence and children press their faces against frosted windows, there is one figure who captures our imagination like no other. He is the jolly man in red, the gift-giver who defies the laws of physics, the mysterious stranger who knows if you've been naughty or nice. But what if I told you that the Santa Claus you think you know is not just a cheerful invention of modern marketing? What if the truth behind this beloved figure is far stranger, far older, and far more fascinating than anything you could imagine? In this video, we're going to peel back the layers of centuries of myth, legend, and deliberate transformation to uncover the hidden true origins of Santa Claus. This is not the story they tell children. This is not the polished version that appears on Christmas cards or department store displays. This is the real story, and it does not begin in the North Pole, not in a workshop filled with elves, but in the ancient world of the 3rd century, in a place where miracles and violence walked hand in hand. The man we now call Santa Claus was once a flesh and blood human being. His name was Nicholas, and he lived in a time when being a Christian could get you tortured, imprisoned, or killed. He walked the dusty roads of the Roman Empire when emperors ruled with absolute power, and the new faith of Christianity was seen as a dangerous threat to the established order. This Nicholas was no gentle gift-giver surrounded by reindeer and candy canes. He was a revolutionary, a rebel, and according to the legends, a man who could raise the dead. But how did this ancient bishop transform into the figure we know today? How did a Greek saint become a Nordic myth, then an American icon, and finally a global symbol of Christmas? The answer takes us on a journey through time, across continents, and into the very heart of how legends are born, how they evolve, and how they can be deliberately reshaped by those who understand their power. We're about to discover that Santa Claus is not one story, but many stories layered on top of each other like geological strata. Each layer tells us something different about the people who believed in it, the times they lived in, and what they needed from their myths. And at the very bottom of this archaeological dig through folklore, we'll find something that might surprise you. So settle in, because this journey will take us from the sun-baked shores of ancient Turkey to the icy fjords of Scandinavia, from the bustling ports of New Amsterdam to the Madison Avenue offices where modern Christmas was packaged and sold to the world. We're going to meet saints and sorcerers, merchants and mythmakers, and we're going to discover that the true story of Santa Claus is far more incredible than any fairy tale. Our story begins in the year 270, in a world that would be almost unrecognizable to us today. The village of Patara sits on the southern coast of what we now call Turkey, but in that time it was part of the Greek world, a prosperous trading port in the mighty Roman Empire. It's here that a child was born who would one day become the most famous gift-giver in human history, though he would not be known by that name for many centuries to come. The boy's name was Nicholas, and from the moment he drew his first breath, his life was marked by tragedy and transformation. His parents were wealthy, devout Christians who raised their son to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ. But when Nicholas was still young, disaster struck. A terrible epidemic swept through the region, and both of his parents died, leaving him an orphan with a vast inheritance and a heart filled with grief. It was in this moment of profound loss that the legend of the gift-giver was truly born. For young Nicholas, faced with more wealth than he could ever spend, made a decision that would echo through the ages. He remembered the words of Christ, "Sell what you own and give the money to the poor." And so he did. He dedicated his entire fortune, his entire life, to helping those who had nothing. But this was no gentle, sanitized charity work. This was the Roman Empire, a world of slavery, poverty, and casual brutality. The people Nicholas helped were not just poor, they were desperate. They were the sick who had no medicine, the hungry who had no food, the young women who faced a fate worse than death if they could not afford a dowry to marry. And it was here that the most famous story of St. Nicholas was born, though it's a story that reveals just how dark and dangerous the world he lived in truly was. There was a man in the region, once prosperous but now fallen on hard times. He had 3 daughters, and in the harsh reality of the ancient world, these young women faced a terrible fate. Without dowries, they could not marry, and without marriage, they would be sold into slavery or forced into prostitution to keep the family from starving. Night after night, the father agonized over his daughter's fate. There seemed to be no solution, no escape from the cruel mathematics of poverty. But someone was watching, someone who had heard of their plight. On 3 separate occasions in the dead of night, a mysterious figure crept to their home. Through an open window he threw bags of gold, enough to provide dowries for each daughter in turn. The gold landed in stockings that had been hung by the fire to dry, and when the family awoke, they found their salvation waiting for them. The daughters were saved from a life of degradation, the family was saved from destruction, and a legend was born. But who was this mysterious benefactor? The father was determined to find out. On the night when the third bag of gold was delivered, the father was waiting. He caught a glimpse of his family's saviour, and to his amazement it was the young Bishop Nicholas. The secret was out, but Nicholas made the man promise not to reveal what he had seen. The gift-giving had to remain anonymous, the helper had to remain hidden. This is where our modern tradition of secret gift-giving comes from, but it's also where we see the first glimpse of something that would become crucial to the Santa Claus legend. Nicholas was not just generous, he was magical. He could appear and disappear like a ghost. He could travel great distances in a single night. He had powers that seemed to transcend the normal limitations of the physical world. But the young bishop's supernatural abilities went far beyond mere gift-giving. There was another story, one that was enormously popular in medieval times, but has been largely forgotten today. It's a story that reveals a much darker, much more powerful side to the man who would become Santa Claus. Nicholas was travelling through the countryside when he stopped at an inn for the night. But this was no ordinary inn, and the innkeeper was no ordinary man. He was a murderer, a monster who had committed an unspeakable crime. 3 young boys had come to his establishment, and in his greed for their money, he had killed them, dismembered their bodies, and hidden the evidence in barrels in his basement, preserving the remains in brine like pickled meat. But Nicholas was no ordinary guest. As soon as he entered the inn, he sensed that something was terribly wrong. His supernatural perception, his connection to the divine, told him that a great evil had been committed in this place. He confronted the innkeeper, and when the truth was revealed, Nicholas did something that defied all natural law. He went down to the basement, he opened the barrels, and he called upon the power of God. The 3 murdered boys rose from the dead, whole and unharmed, as if they had never been killed at all. This miracle established Nicholas not just as a gift-giver, but as a wielder of divine power, a man who could literally conquer death itself. This story would make Nicholas the patron saint of children, but it also established something else that would echo through the centuries. Nicholas was not just kind, he was fierce. He was not just generous, he was powerful. He was a protector of the innocent, and he would use supernatural force to defend them against those who would do them harm. This reputation for fierce protection would soon be put to the ultimate test. In the year 325, something unprecedented happened in the Christian world. The Roman Emperor Constantine, who had recently legalized Christianity throughout the empire, called for a great council. Bishops from across the known world were summoned to the city of Nicaea to settle a theological dispute that threatened to tear the young church apart. At the centre of this controversy was a priest named Arius, who denied the divine nature of Christ. He argued that Jesus was subordinate to God the Father, a created being rather than an eternal one. This might seem like an abstract theological debate to us today, but in the 4th century, it was a matter of life and death for the faith itself. The very foundation of Christianity hung in the balance. Hundreds of bishops gathered in the emperor's summer palace, their voices echoing through marble halls as they debated the nature of the divine. Among them sat Nicholas, now an experienced bishop who had survived years of persecution under previous emperors. He had been imprisoned, tortured, and exiled for his faith. His face bore the scars of his suffering, including a badly broken nose that he had received during the brutal persecutions under Emperor Diocletian. As the debates raged on, Nicholas listened to Arius present his case with growing anger. Here was a man who was not just questioning doctrine, but in Nicholas's view, attacking the very heart of the faith for which so many had died. The bishop from Myra had seen Christians fed to lions, burned alive, and crucified for their belief in Christ's divinity. And now this priest was denying that divinity before the assembled church. The rage that had been building inside Nicholas finally erupted. In full view of the emperor and hundreds of bishops, he stood up, marched across the hall, and struck Arius in the face with his fist. The hall fell silent. The violence was shocking, unprecedented. A bishop had just assaulted a fellow cleric in front of the emperor himself. The consequences were swift. Nicholas was stripped of his episcopal robes and thrown into prison. It seemed that his career as a bishop was over, his reputation destroyed by a single moment of ungovernable anger. But according to the legend, that night something miraculous occurred. As Nicholas sat in his cell contemplating the ruin of his life's work, he received divine visitors. Christ himself appeared, along with the Virgin Mary. They restored his episcopal vestments and affirmed that his violent defence of the faith had been righteous. When the guards came the next morning, they found Nicholas fully dressed in his bishop's robes, though they had been confiscated the night before. Word of this miracle spread quickly through the council. Emperor Constantine, recognizing divine intervention when he saw it, pardoned Nicholas and restored him to his position. The bishop who had punched a heretic in the face became a hero of orthodoxy, a man whose violent passion for truth had been vindicated by heaven itself. This story reveals something crucial about the original St. Nicholas that has been almost entirely erased from our modern understanding. He was not a gentle, grandfatherly figure who spoke in soft whispers and patted children on the head. He was a warrior for justice, a man whose love was so fierce that it could manifest as righteous violence. He was someone who would literally fight for what he believed in, consequences be damned. But there's another layer to this story that takes us even deeper into the mystery of who Nicholas really was. Because the man who could raise the dead and receive visions from Christ was living in a world where such powers were not seen as unique to Christianity. The Roman Empire was a place where mystery religions flourished, where gods and goddesses from across the known world competed for followers, and where the line between the natural and supernatural was gossamer thin. Nicholas lived in a time when people believed that certain individuals could commune with the divine, could channel supernatural forces, and could perform acts that defied the normal laws of reality. He was what we might call a holy man, a figure who stood at the intersection between the human and divine worlds. But he was not the only such figure in his time and place. The Eastern Mediterranean in the 3rd and 4th centuries was a melting pot of religious traditions. Ancient Greek and Roman gods still had their followers. Mystery cults from Egypt, Persia, and other distant lands offered secret knowledge and supernatural powers. And emerging from this spiritual chaos was Christianity, trying to establish itself as the one true faith. In this environment, Nicholas was competing not just with other Christian bishops for the loyalty of the people, but with a whole pantheon of magical figures, divine intermediaries, and supernatural gift-givers. There were gods who brought prosperity, goddesses who protected children, and mysterious beings who travelled between worlds to help mortals in need. What made Nicholas special was not just his generosity or his miraculous powers, but the way he combined them with an absolutely uncompromising dedication to his faith. He was willing to suffer for his beliefs, to fight for them, and to die for them if necessary. In a world full of religious options, he offered something unique, a kind of supernatural assistance that came with moral authority. But Nicholas's story was just beginning. His death in 343 would mark not the end of his influence, but the beginning of his transformation into something far greater than any single historical figure. Because the bones of saints in the medieval world were not just relics, they were sources of ongoing miraculous power, and the remains of Nicholas would become some of the most sought-after holy objects in all of Christendom. The church he had built in Myra became a pilgrimage destination, drawing thousands of believers who came seeking healing, guidance, and the continuation of his legendary generosity. But this was still just the beginning of the journey that would eventually transform a Greek bishop into a global icon. The real magic was about to begin, as Nicholas's story spread across continents and through cultures that would reshape him into forms he never could have imagined. And so we return to where we began, to that moment when children pressed their faces against frosted windows, waiting for the arrival of a figure who seems to exist outside the normal boundaries of time and space. But now you know the truth. The Santa Claus who captures our imagination is not a modern invention. He's the latest incarnation of a story that stretches back 17 centuries to a man who walked the dusty roads of the Roman Empire with divine fire burning in his heart. We have traced the path from Nicholas the bishop to Santa the icon, from a fierce defender of faith who could raise the dead to a jolly gift-giver who slides down chimneys. We have seen how a Greek saint became a Dutch tradition, how Dutch immigrants carried Santa Claus to American shores, and how 19th century writers and artists transformed him into the figure we recognize today. Each generation has added their own layer to the legend, their own needs and dreams and hopes. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about this journey is not how much Santa Claus has changed, but how much he has stayed the same. The essential mystery remains. He is still the figure who appears in the darkness of winter to bring light. He is still the one who knows our deepest needs before we speak them. He is still the magical being who can be everywhere at once, who can see into our hearts, and who judges us not by our wealth or status, but by the simple question of whether we have been good. The hidden truth of Santa Claus is that there was never really a hidden truth at all. The power of his story lies not in its historical accuracy, but in its ability to carry something eternal across the centuries. From a 3rd century bishop's bags of gold to a modern child's Christmas morning, the message remains unchanged. In the darkest time of the year, when hope seems furthest away, someone is watching, someone cares, and miracles are still possible. The next time you see that familiar figure in red, remember that you are looking at one of humanity's oldest dreams made manifest. You are seeing 17 centuries of faith, hope, and the unshakable belief that love can triumph over darkness, that generosity can conquer greed, and that somewhere in the vast mystery of existence there are forces working on the side of wonder. That is the true magic of Santa Claus, and that is why his story will never end.